Saturday mornings were usually the kind of day you barely noticed slipping by. The sort where you got lost in routine, knocking out chores, fiddling with the car, and letting the hours blur together. That's exactly how I'd planned mine to go. The old Mustang had been acting up for weeks, and I finally had a chunk of time to swap out the brake pads. The garage carried its familiar scent of motor oil mixed with a faint trace of the cleaner I'd used earlier to scrub the workbench. The radio played softly in the background, just loud enough to blend into the steady clinking of tools as I loosened bolts. It was oddly calming. Olivia poked her head in now and then, her hand curled around a steaming mug of coffee. Her perfume, light and floral, hung in the air every time she passed through, one of those scents that could paint a picture in your mind if you closed your eyes. She never lingered long, just enough to check in, flash me one of those quick, effortless smiles, and then disappear. She casually mentioned her plans, meeting her friend Rachel at the country club and maybe squeezing in some shopping afterward. Nothing out of the ordinary. I barely looked up, just nodded and mumbled something vague before returning to the car. It all felt routine. Comfortable. But by noon, something shifted. When Olivia walked in this time, she wasn't the same woman who'd been drifting in and out all morning. She wore a beige dress that clung to her in all the right places, paired with strappy sandals that made soft clicks against the garage floor. Her hair wasn't swept into her usual ponytail or left to fall in its natural waves. It was styled, carefully and deliberately. She looked sharp. Too sharp for an afternoon with Rachel. I paused, still gripping the wrench, and gave her a once-over. "You look nice," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. Olivia's smile tugged at the corners of her lips, just enough to let me know she noticed I'd noticed. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't wait for me for dinner. We might stay out late." The words themselves were harmless, simple and casual. But something about how she said them stuck with me. Maybe it was the way her perfume seemed a little stronger than usual, or how her eyes skirted away from mine as she spoke. Or maybe I was just imagining things. Either way, I didn't let it consume me, at least not right then. I went back to tightening the last bolt on the brake caliper, focusing on the task in front of me. By the time I'd poured the brake fluid and tested the pedal, she was already gone. The house felt quieter without her, the radio humming faintly in the background but not quite loud enough to fill the space. I brushed it off. People dress up sometimes, it's no big deal. I figured she and Rachel were heading to some swanky lunch spot, the kind with white tablecloths and menus that didn't bother listing prices. Women love that sort of thing. At least, that's what I told myself. But as the day wore on and the sun dipped lower, my mind kept drifting back to that dress, those sandals, and the way she'd said not to wait up. Looking back, I think that moment was the first tiny fracture in the foundation. Barely noticeable, like a crack in a windshield you don't see until it spreads. At the time, though, I didn't know any better. I chalked it up to just another Saturday, with Olivia off living her life while I lived mine. If only it had stayed that simple. If only I hadn't started paying closer attention. Maybe then, things wouldn't have spiraled the way they did. Maybe I wouldn't have ended up standing in the ruins of what used to be our life together. But cracks have a way of growing, don't they? And sometimes, it only takes one small moment to pull the thread that unravels everything. Sunday mornings in our house were usually peaceful. Olivia liked to sleep in, and I'd take advantage of the quiet to tackle odd jobs around the house. That morning, I decided to deal with the overflowing laundry basket that had been threatening to spill out onto the floor. It felt like a simple enough task, something to keep my hands busy while my mind wandered. Laundry was just laundry, a monotonous task to keep my hands busy while I waited for Olivia to wake up so we could have breakfast together. I went through the motions, sorting the usual items, t-shirts, jeans, and Olivia's blouses. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what I thought until something unusual caught my eye. It wasn't immediately obvious. Just a texture that didn't quite fit in with the familiar feel of our clothes. I reached for it, holding it up to the light. A black silk tie. Smooth, elegant, and expensive looking. It was the kind of thing that seemed entirely out of place in our home. I frowned, turning it over in my hands. It wasn't mine. I'd never owned a tie like that, not even close. I inspected it carefully, hoping for some sort of clue, a brand name, a set of initials, anything to explain how it had found its way here. But there was nothing. It was immaculate. The kind of tie you'd expect to see paired with a tailored suit, not mixed in with our everyday laundry. I tried to think back to the last time anyone dressed like that had been in our house, but I came up blank. We didn't throw fancy dinner parties, and our friends were more about casual hangouts in jeans and sneakers than anything requiring formal wear. The tie didn't belong. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it had been left behind after some long-forgotten gathering. Or maybe Olivia had borrowed it for something I couldn't quite figure out. She was always helping friends plan events or picking up odds and ends for them. It wasn't entirely out of character. But even as I tried to reason it away, there was something about that tie that just didn't sit right with me. I draped it over the edge of the laundry room cabinet and walked away, telling myself it wasn't worth bringing up. Not yet, anyway. I wasn't the kind of guy to kick up a fuss over something so small. But every time I walked past the laundry room, it was there, a quiet, persistent reminder of a question I didn't have an answer to. Later that evening, Olivia came home. She was relaxed, almost radiant, like someone who'd spent the day completely at ease. We settled into the living room, me flipping through TV channels aimlessly while she scrolled through her phone. That tie was still nagging at me, so I decided to bring it up casually, like it had just crossed my mind. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light, "do you know where that tie came from? The one in the laundry?" Her eyes flicked toward the laundry room, and for the briefest moment, her brow creased. It was subtle, so quick that most people wouldn't have noticed. Then she laughed, her tone light and easy. "Oh, that's James's," she said. "We were helping him get ready for his anniversary party last week. I must have accidentally tossed it in my bag." Her explanation rolled off her tongue smoothly, almost too smoothly. It made sense, though. James was a mutual friend and exactly the kind of guy who'd own a tie like that. Still, something about her answer felt off. I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Makes sense," I said, pretending to let it go. She turned her attention back to her phone, but I couldn't help noticing how quickly that crease in her brow had vanished. It was like a door had been slammed shut, hiding whatever had been behind it. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the tie. About her explanation. About how her laugh had seemed just a little too light, her tone just a little too polished. It wasn't enough to accuse her of anything, but it was enough to plant a seed. It's strange how something so small, just a piece of fabric, can take on so much weight. But in that moment, it wasn't just a tie. It was a question. A tiny mystery that I couldn't quite let go of, no matter how hard I tried. I told myself to forget it. To trust her. But trust is a fragile thing. Once a crack forms, no matter how small, you can't help but wonder when it'll break wide open. By the time the weekend rolled around, I thought I'd moved past it. Olivia had given me an explanation, and there wasn't any concrete reason to doubt her. But that crease in her brow, the practiced way she delivered her answer, it lingered in the back of my mind like a splinter. And then something else happened. It started out innocently enough. We'd planned a picnic, one of those rare moments where you slow down and appreciate the little things. To make room for the cooler and blankets, I decided to clean out Olivia's car. I expected to find the usual suspects, reusable grocery bags, crumpled receipts, maybe a forgotten coffee cup rolling around. But instead, I stumbled on something I couldn't ignore. Tucked away in the corner of the trunk, partially hidden beneath an umbrella, was a small velvet box. My chest tightened as I picked it up, my pulse quickening. It was heavier than I'd imagined, the kind of weight that suggested it held something valuable. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were a pair of gold cufflinks, gleaming like they'd just been polished. They had an elegant, understated design, with the initials AR engraved on each one. I stared at them, my mind racing. They were clearly expensive, the sort of accessory a man might wear to a high-stakes business meeting or a formal event. Definitely not mine. And Olivia? She was particular about her belongings, meticulous even. This wasn't the kind of thing she'd casually toss in the trunk of her car. So who was AR? I closed the box, my fingers lingering on the soft velvet. A dozen questions rushed through my mind, but I wasn't ready to act on any of them. Should I confront her right away? Demand an explanation? No. Not yet. I needed time to process. To think. So I carefully put the box back exactly where I'd found it and continued cleaning out the car like nothing had happened. But that night, the cufflinks wouldn't leave me alone. They gnawed at me, creeping into every quiet moment. As we lay in bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside, I decided to bring them up. I kept my voice casual, almost indifferent. I found some cufflinks in your car today, I said into the quiet. Beside me, Olivia shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. Her silhouette looked calm, but there was a flicker of surprise in her voice as she repeated, "Cufflinks?" "Yeah," I said. "In the trunk. Gold ones, with the initials AR on them." For a split second, her stillness felt heavy, almost deliberate. Then she laughed, light and easy. "Oh, those must be Nathan's," she said smoothly. "We were organizing an auction at work, and he asked me to hold on to them. I must have forgotten they were in there." Her explanation was quick. Too quick. But there was nothing in her tone that suggested panic. If anything, she sounded a little annoyed with herself for being forgetful. I couldn't find a single crack in her story, so I nodded. "Makes sense," I said, rolling onto my back. But it didn't make sense. Not completely. The box had been stashed in the trunk, buried under other items. If it was something she was holding onto for work, why not keep it somewhere more accessible, like her office or her bag? And why hadn't she mentioned it before? Over the next few days, I started noticing other things. Small things. Patterns that hadn't been there before. Her phone, which she used to leave face up on the kitchen counter, was now always flipped face down. She started staying out later, often with vague excuses about work or last-minute plans with friends. When I asked her about her day, her answers were polished but brief, almost like she was reading from a script. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, piecing together random events to create a story that didn't exist. But each new inconsistency felt like another thread unraveling from the fabric of our life together. Then there was the gym. Olivia had always been disciplined about staying fit, but her routine became unpredictable. Extra trips during the week. Spontaneous sessions on weekends. When I suggested joining her for a class, she laughed and said the gym was her alone time. None of these things, on their own, were damning. A silk tie. A pair of cufflinks. A few extra workouts. But together, they started to paint a picture I didn't want to see. I found myself replaying conversations, dissecting her tone of voice, retracing her steps in my mind. There was no solid evidence to confront her with, but the distance between us was growing. Olivia, who had once felt like an open book, now seemed like she was writing entire chapters without me. The trust we'd built over the years was starting to crack. And the thing about cracks? They only get worse if you ignore them. By this point, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her explanations were always clean and practiced, almost rehearsed. And while they fit the facts, they left a bitter aftertaste. This wasn't about jealousy or paranoia. It was deeper than that, an instinct I couldn't silence. But I wasn't ready to confront her outright. Not yet. If I was going to go down that road, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Olivia was sharp. If she was hiding something, she was doing it carefully. One wrong move on my part could tip her off and ruin any chance of finding the truth. So I decided to proceed cautiously. Deliberately. I started with a simple, subtle test. One evening, Olivia mentioned she'd be heading out with Rachel again, this time for dinner at a restaurant they frequented. It sounded routine, just another night out with a friend. Nothing unusual. But about 45 minutes after she left, I decided to call her, pretending I needed help finding something. "Hey, Olivia," I said, keeping my tone casual, like it wasn't a big deal. "Sorry to bother you, but I can't seem to find the kitchen renovation contract. Do you remember where we put it?" There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to make me wonder if I'd caught her off guard. Then her voice softened, as steady as always. "Oh, it's in the blue folder in the hallway drawer. You must have missed it." As she spoke, I paid close attention, not just to her words but to the sounds in the background. There was a faint hum of conversations, the occasional clink of glass, and soft music, exactly what you'd expect to hear at a restaurant. Everything seemed to check out. She even asked if I'd eaten dinner yet, a thoughtful touch that almost made me feel foolish for doubting her. But just as I was about to end the call, I heard it, a man's voice, faint but distinct. "Hey, Olivia, everything okay?" he said. I froze. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. Maybe it was just a waiter or someone sitting nearby. But there was something about the familiarity in his tone that didn't sit right with me. The next day, I checked the drawer she'd mentioned. Sure enough, the contract was there, exactly where she said it would be. Everything lined up. But that voice lingered in the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored. The second phase of my plan required a bit more effort. I had a GPS tracker, a small, discreet device I'd used during road trips to avoid getting lost. It was compact, easy to hide, and linked to an app on my phone. That morning, while Olivia was in the shower, I slipped it into the trunk of her car, tucking it under the carpet. It was practically invisible, perfectly secure. That evening, when Olivia left for another supposed dinner with Rachel, I opened the app and watched her route. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove straight to the restaurant they often visited. For about 2 hours, the car stayed in the same spot, parked where it should be. But as the third hour passed, the tracker showed her car on the move again. This time, it headed toward a quiet residential area. My chest tightened as I stared at the blinking dot on the screen. I knew that area well. It wasn't near any restaurants, shops, or places she'd normally go. When Olivia came home later that night, I tried to sound as casual as I could. "How was dinner? Did you stop anywhere else afterward?" She smiled, her expression calm and easy. "Oh, yes. Lauren forgot her phone at the restaurant, so we had to drive around the neighborhood looking for it. Can you imagine? 10 minutes of circling before we finally found it." Her explanation was seamless. Every stop and turn she described matched perfectly with the route I'd seen on the tracker. On paper, everything added up. Yet something still felt off. The third part of my plan leaned on one of the most basic senses, smell. Olivia had a favorite silk shawl she usually wore for evenings out, but this time, she'd left without it. When she came home, her dress carried a faint scent I didn't recognize. It wasn't her usual floral perfume. Instead, it was musky, distinctly masculine. "Did something happen?" I asked, feigning concern. "You smell different." Olivia laughed softly, brushing it off with ease. "Oh, the waiter spilled some cologne on me while clearing the table. Clumsy, right?" Her answer was quick, too quick. My gut twisted, telling me something wasn't right. The little inconsistencies, the vague explanations, they were all starting to pile up. On their own, each detail seemed innocent enough. A tie, a pair of cufflinks, a strange route, a new scent. But together, they formed a picture I couldn't ignore. Olivia was hiding something. I didn't know what it was yet, but I was sure of one thing: I wasn't going to let it slide. The next step wasn't just about collecting more evidence, it was about taking things up a notch. If she was determined to keep secrets, I was just as determined to uncover them. And this time, I wasn't going to do it alone. What I didn't know yet was whether what I was about to find would be worse than the not knowing. The doubts swirling in my mind were relentless, battling against the growing realization that I was actively searching for something. It's strange, isn't it? A part of you clings to the hope that you're wrong, that it's all just paranoia, while another part urges you to keep digging, convinced there's more beneath the surface. By this point, it wasn't just about the tie, the cufflinks, or even the faint scent of cologne. It was about Olivia herself. Her subtle changes, the way her responses felt rehearsed, the distance that seemed to creep into our conversations, had become impossible to ignore. I decided it was time to involve others. Not people who would jump to conclusions or gossip, but men I trusted. Men who had stood by me through thick and thin. I needed fresh perspectives, eyes unclouded by the emotions that were tying me in knots. Adam was the first person I thought of. My best friend from college, Adam had a knack for analyzing situations like a detective in a mystery novel. Then there was Logan, my next-door neighbor, who owed me a favor after I'd saved him thousands by repairing his roof last summer. And finally, Samuel. A former military man with instincts sharper than anyone I'd ever met, Samuel still felt indebted to me for the loan I'd given him to cover his sister's emergency surgery. Together, they were the kind of team I needed, sharp, trustworthy, and willing to get their hands dirty. When I explained everything to them, we were standing in my garage. The familiar smell of motor oil mingled with the faint scent of cigarette smoke as I laid it all out: the tie, the cufflinks, the tracker, the strange scent on her dress, and Olivia's polished, almost scripted responses. "I'm not saying she's doing anything," I began, keeping my voice steady. "But something doesn't add up, and I need to know what's going on." Adam was the first to speak, his voice steady. "You're doing the right thing, man. If she's hiding something, we'll figure it out. If not, at least you'll have peace of mind." Logan nodded, his expression serious. "But we've got to be smart about this. No amateur sleuthing. No obvious moves." Samuel crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "Subtlety is key. Let her think she's in control while we piece this together." Their words were reassuring, but the uncertainty of the road ahead still weighed heavily on me. I wasn't the kind of man prone to paranoia, but this situation was testing my limits. Clarity was what I needed, and with their help, I was determined to get it. Our first step was straightforward: surveillance. Adam had a drone, a sleek, quiet model with a long battery life and an excellent camera. If Olivia's outings involved more than she was letting on, we'd see it. One evening, as Olivia headed out, Adam followed her car with the drone. The device hovered discreetly above as she pulled into the parking lot of a high-end restaurant. At first, everything seemed normal. She greeted a group of sharply dressed people, likely colleagues, and joined them inside. But a while later, she stepped out onto the terrace alone, her face tense as she spoke into her phone. The drone couldn't pick up the audio over the noise of the city, but her body language spoke volumes. Her hand gestures were restrained but urgent, as though she was trying to explain something under pressure. It was subtle, but it didn't sit right. Meanwhile, Logan played his role on the ground. With Max, his enormous Great Dane, on a leash, he strolled casually around the restaurant's perimeter. A guy walking his dog in an upscale neighborhood barely drew a second glance. He managed to overhear snippets of her conversation. "No, I can't right now. It's too risky. We need to finish this by Friday." Her tone wasn't romantic. It wasn't affectionate. If anything, it sounded scared. It only deepened the mystery. Samuel, ever the strategist, took the next step. Using a fake name and a polished persona, he scheduled a meeting at Olivia's workplace, posing as a potential client. His goal was simple: to observe her up close. During the meeting, Samuel watched Olivia closely as she spoke with her boss, Tyler. Their conversation was quiet, but certain phrases caught his attention. "If this gets out, the company won't survive." The stakes were higher than I'd imagined. Whatever Olivia was involved in, it wasn't petty or insignificant. It was serious. By then, I knew I wasn't dealing with mere suspicions anymore. This was bigger than I'd thought, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening, it was going to change everything. We gathered again in my garage that night, the familiar smell of oil and metal heavy in the air, now mingling with the weight of unanswered questions. Each of us had brought back a piece of the puzzle, but none of it seemed to fit together cleanly. Samuel summed it up best: "This isn't just about an affair. Whatever she's tangled up in, it's bigger than that." That word, bigger, hit me like a lead weight. For the first time, I wondered if Olivia might be in over her head. Was she caught up in something beyond her control? Or worse, was she an active participant? Either way, one thing was clear: I couldn't stop now. I needed the truth, no matter where it led. This was only the beginning. The pieces were starting to come together, just barely. The tie, the cufflinks, the faint male voice on the phone, the cryptic conversation overheard at the restaurant. None of it pointed to clear betrayal, but none of it felt right either. It was like Olivia had built this pristine, polished facade, but tiny cracks were starting to show, threatening to expose whatever was underneath. Samuel's observation at her office kept echoing in my mind: "If this gets out, the company won't survive." What could be so damaging, so dangerous, that it had both Olivia and her boss, Tyler, speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors? And why did Olivia look so tense, so burdened, when she thought no one was watching? I decided it was time to take things a step further. I wasn't ready to confront her directly, but I needed to get closer, closer to the truth. That's when Adam came up with an idea. "I've got something for you," he said one night as we huddled in the garage, our voices low. From his bag, he pulled out a sleek velvet box. Inside was a pen, polished, elegant, and perfectly inconspicuous. "It's not just a pen," Adam said, flipping it over to reveal a tiny, nearly invisible camera embedded near the clip. "Give it to her. Say it's a corporate gift or something. She'll never suspect it." It was genius, a subtle way to monitor her without raising suspicion. The next morning, I left it on the kitchen counter with a note: "Thought you'd like this for work. Looks professional. R." When Olivia saw it, she smiled, thanked me, and tucked it into her bag without hesitation. That evening, Adam, Logan, and I reviewed the footage. My stomach knotted as we watched the grainy video unfold. The camera was slightly askew, capturing a partial view of Olivia's desk and the doorway to her office. At first, the day looked ordinary: Olivia typing on her laptop, taking phone calls, and glancing at her phone every now and then. But then Tyler walked in. The atmosphere shifted immediately. He didn't bother knocking. He just entered and closed the door behind him, his presence filling the room with an unsettling energy. Olivia froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Tyler leaned over her desk, his voice low but firm. The audio wasn't perfect, but the words that came through were chilling. "You understand what's at stake," he said, his tone sharp. "This isn't optional, Olivia." Her response was hesitant, barely above a whisper. "I know, but I'm running out of time. I don't want to do this." "You don't have a choice," Tyler snapped, cutting her off. "If Luke finds out," he didn't finish, but the threat hung heavy in the air. Olivia turned her head away from the camera, but her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. Tyler straightened his tie, his expression cold and resolute. You'll do what needs to be done. You don't want this getting out any more than I do. With that, he left, shutting the door behind him. Olivia remained in her chair, her head falling into her hands. Her shoulders trembled slightly, the weight of whatever she was dealing with visibly crushing her. The footage ended there, but it was more than enough to send my mind spiraling. Questions raced through my head. What didn't Olivia want me to find out? What was Tyler holding over her? And who the hell was Luke? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, this wasn't just about us anymore. Whatever Olivia was involved in, it was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than I'd realized. And the deeper I dug, the more certain I was that there was no turning back. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. But the closer I got, the more I wondered if I was truly ready for what I might find. And why did it feel like Olivia was caught in something so much bigger than just the two of us? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of what I'd seen, trying to piece it all together. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers and strip away the layers of secrecy. But the other part, the colder, more rational part, knew better. I needed more. If I was going to confront Olivia, I couldn't afford to go in unprepared. I needed undeniable proof. The next morning, I called Samuel. She's in over her head, I said, my voice low. But I still can't tell how much of this is her doing. Samuel didn't hesitate. Then we keep digging, he said firmly. No assumptions, no accusations, just facts. And so, we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth, no matter how messy or painful it might turn out to be. The cracks in Olivia's facade were getting wider, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The only question was whether I was ready for the fallout. The footage of Tyler and Olivia's tense exchange played over and over in my mind, like a loop I couldn't escape. I could no longer convince myself this was just a misunderstanding or a series of coincidences. The weight of Tyler's words, "If Luke finds out," pressed on my chest like a heavy blanket. I didn't know if Olivia was a victim or an accomplice. But the time for speculating was over. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One evening, after working late, Olivia left her laptop open on the coffee table. That wasn't like her. She usually logged out or carried her devices upstairs to the bedroom. My pulse quickened as I waited for her to head to the shower. When I heard the water running, I quietly sat down at the table, staring at the laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as I debated crossing this line. I told myself it wasn't snooping, it was about finding the truth. It was a necessary step if there was any chance of salvaging what little trust remained between us. I clicked on her messaging app, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. The chat window with Tyler was already open. The most recent messages stared back at me like a slap in the face. Tyler, are you sure about tomorrow? You can still back out. Olivia, no. I've made up my mind. I want to move forward. Tyler, the hotel is booked. Room 213. I'll meet you there at 7. Olivia, understood. I'll be there. The words hit me like a freight train. There was no room for ambiguity, no way to twist this into something innocent. Olivia wasn't being coerced or manipulated. She was actively participating. Whatever this was, she had chosen it. I snapped a picture of the screen with my phone, carefully closed the laptop, and placed it back exactly as I'd found it. Then I sat back on the couch, staring blankly at the wall as the weight of the realization settled in. Olivia wasn't just hiding something, she was deliberately deceiving me. The next day, I knew I had to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. I couldn't let anger take over. That would only lead to chaos. No, I needed a plan, a calm, calculated approach. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about protecting myself, my home, and everything I'd worked for. I installed a small camera in Olivia's car, carefully tucking it into the plastic lining of the dashboard. The device was nearly invisible, and with the live feed linked to my phone, I could monitor her movements in real time. That evening, Olivia told me she was heading out for a work meeting. I waited until she left before opening the app to watch her route. At first, it was exactly what I expected. She drove straight to a high-end restaurant downtown, parking in a secluded corner of the lot. Moments later, Tyler appeared. He walked briskly to her car, glancing over his shoulder as he climbed into the passenger seat. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted wasn't one I wanted to see. My pulse raced as I watched their interaction unfold, every second tightening the knot in my stomach. The audio from the camera was faint but clear enough to capture the tension in their voices. Tyler's words sent a chill down my spine. "Are you sure about this? There's no going back after tonight." Olivia's response came without hesitation. "I'm sure. I've been waiting for this for too long." Then it happened, the kiss. Brief but unmistakable. She leaned in first, closing the distance between them without a shred of doubt. My stomach twisted as I watched them pull back, their faces painted with a mix of determination and guilt. I didn't need to follow them when they drove off. The camera tracked their route to a luxury hotel across town. I already knew where they were going and what was likely to happen next. But I wasn't done yet. I'd prepared for this moment earlier in the day. Room 213. I'd arranged for a hidden recording device to be placed there, neatly tucked into a decorative lamp. It was the final step, the last piece of proof that would leave no room for ambiguity. Hours later, sitting in the garage with my phone connected to the device, I listened to their conversation. The audio was crystal clear, every word cutting deeper than the last. Tyler's text came first, "Why did it take you so long to agree to this?" Olivia's response hit me like a hammer, "Luke doesn't see me anymore. I'm just there, part of his routine. But with you, I feel alive." Tyler replied, "You could have just left him." And Olivia's answer shattered something inside me, "It's not that simple. I don't want to hurt him. This is easier. This is easier." That single sentence broke me in a way I didn't know was possible. Betraying me, lying to me, destroying our marriage, she spoke of it like it was the simplest solution. A matter of convenience. I ended the recording and stared at the screen in silence. I had everything I needed, the texts, the footage, the recordings. Proof of her lies, her choices, and her actions. There was no longer any room for doubt. The woman I thought I knew, the life I believed we shared, was gone. That night, every interaction with Olivia felt hollow. Her words rang empty, her smiles felt like a mask barely hiding the truth. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. If I was going to do this, it would be on my terms. The cracks in our marriage had widened into a chasm, and soon, everything would collapse. But when it did, it would be precise and calculated. I wouldn't let anger cloud my judgment or give her room for excuses. Then she handed me the perfect opportunity. "We're hosting a small corporate party this Friday," she announced over dinner, her voice light and casual. "Just a few colleagues, nothing too elaborate. Can you help me set up?" She smiled as she asked, the kind of smile that once might have softened me. Now, it felt rehearsed, calculated. I forced myself to match her expression. "Of course. Whatever you need." Inside, I could barely contain my disbelief. She was bringing Tyler into our home. The audacity of it was staggering. If she thought this party would be her sanctuary, her safe haven, she was dead wrong. This wouldn't be a celebration. It would be an unveiling. The day of the party, I worked quietly but with purpose. Every move I made was deliberate, ensuring everything was ready, not for her guests, but for my plan. I transferred all the evidence, the messages, the recordings, the footage, onto a secure flash drive. Then I set up the living room TV to display everything with the press of a button. I wasn't planning a screaming match or a chaotic scene. No, this wasn't about drama. This was about clarity. It was about showing the truth in a way that couldn't be ignored or twisted. When the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. And when it was over, there would be no doubt about who she truly was, and what she had done. My heart pounded as I watched their interaction unfold, my breath catching with every word that filtered through the faint audio. Tyler's voice was firm, laced with tension. "Are you sure about this? There's no going back after tonight." Olivia didn't hesitate. "I'm sure. I've been waiting for this for too long." Then came the kiss. It was brief but unmistakable. Olivia leaned in first, her movements deliberate and without a hint of doubt. My stomach twisted as I watched them pull away, their faces betraying a mix of determination and guilt. They drove off together, the camera tracking their route to a luxury hotel across town. I didn't need to follow them, I already knew where they were going and what would happen next. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Earlier that day, I had arranged for a hidden recording device to be placed in room 213. It was discreetly tucked inside a decorative lamp, perfectly positioned to capture everything. If there were still any lingering doubts about Olivia's intentions, this would erase them completely. Hours later, I sat in the garage, the dim light casting long shadows as I connected my phone to the device. The audio was crystal clear, each word slicing through me like a knife. Tyler's text came first. "Why did it take you so long to agree to this?" Olivia replied, "Luke doesn't see me anymore. I'm just there. Part of his routine. But with you, I feel alive." Tyler shot back, "You could have just left him." Olivia's response shattered something inside me. "It's not that simple. I don't want to hurt him. This is easier. This is easier." That single sentence hit harder than anything else. Betraying me, lying to me, tearing apart everything we built together, it was easier for her. A matter of convenience. I ended the recording and sat in silence, staring at the screen as the weight of it all settled in. I had everything I needed. Proof of her lies, her actions, her choices. There was no longer any room for doubt. The woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we shared, it was gone. That night, I couldn't even look at Olivia the same way. Every word she spoke sounded hollow, every smile felt like a mask hiding the truth. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. If I was going to do this, it would be on my terms. The cracks in our marriage had widened into a chasm, and soon, everything would collapse. But when it did, it would happen on my timeline. I wasn't going to lash out in anger or let emotions take over. No, I was going to expose her lies with precision, leaving her no room for excuses. And when the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. Then she handed me the perfect opportunity. "We're hosting a small corporate party this Friday," she announced casually over dinner. "Just a few colleagues, nothing too elaborate. Can you help me set up?" Her request came with a smile, the kind of smile that might have softened me in the past. But now, it felt rehearsed. Calculated. I forced myself to smile back. "Of course. Whatever you need." Inside, I was reeling at her audacity. She was inviting Tyler into my home, our home. If she thought this party would be her safe haven, she was sorely mistaken. This wouldn't be a celebration. It would be an unveiling. On the day of the party, I worked quietly but deliberately, ensuring everything was ready, not for her guests, but for my plan. I transferred all the evidence, the messages, the recordings, the footage, onto a secure flash drive. Then, I set up the living room TV to display everything with the press of a single button. This wasn't about causing a scene or creating chaos. No yelling, no shouting match. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. When the moment came, Olivia and her lies would have nowhere to hide. Olivia had spent the night in the master bedroom. I didn't hear her come downstairs, and honestly, I didn't care. She was no longer my concern, not in the way she once was. First thing in the morning, I made a call to Tyler Hayes, a divorce attorney known for being as ruthless as he was brilliant. When I laid out my case and presented the evidence I'd gathered, the messages, recordings, and footage, Tyler leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This isn't just a case," he said. "This is a complete obliteration. We'll freeze all joint assets immediately, secure the house, and ensure she walks away with nothing. You want justice, Luke? You'll get it." Tyler wasted no time. By the end of the day, Olivia's access to our joint accounts was frozen. Her credit cards were declined at the gas station, and the call I received from her that afternoon was dripping with panic. "Luke, what's going on? I can't access any money. My cards aren't working," she said, her voice edged with desperation. "You made your choice, Olivia," I replied, cutting her off. "This is just the beginning of the consequences." I hung up without another word. My voice had been calm, measured. But inside, I felt a storm brewing. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. It was about reclaiming the life she had shattered and ensuring that her betrayal didn't go unanswered. Tyler had another card to play. He pointed out the professional implications of Olivia and Tyler's affair. With precision, he compiled a detailed report, complete with every damning piece of evidence, and sent it directly to the board of directors at their company. The corporate world is unforgiving, and scandals like this aren't just frowned upon, they're career-ending. Within days, Tyler was summoned to an emergency meeting. According to Tyler Hayes' sources, the chairman didn't sugarcoat it. "You've violated our code of conduct, abused your authority, and jeopardized the company's reputation. You're terminated, effective immediately," the chairman declared. There was no severance package, no soft landing. Tyler walked out of the building with a single box of personal belongings, his reputation in ruins. Olivia didn't escape unscathed either. Although she wasn't fired outright, she was suspended indefinitely pending an internal review. In the corporate world, a suspension like that is nothing more than a polite way of saying, "Pack your things." Her professional life, much like her personal one, was crumbling around her. The courtroom became our final battleground. In our state, adultery is still a significant factor in divorce proceedings, and Tyler Hayes made sure every piece of evidence was entered into the public record. The messages, recordings, and footage laid bare every detail of Olivia's betrayal for everyone to see. When the judge delivered the verdict, it was decisive. The house was awarded to me, along with all our joint accounts and investments. Olivia was denied alimony and ordered to cover all legal fees associated with the case. She left the courtroom with nothing, no home, no money, no safety net. But Tyler had one more suggestion. "Leave the evidence in open court," he said. "Let it remain accessible to anyone who's curious, friends, colleagues, even strangers." I agreed. The whispers began almost immediately, and Olivia's carefully crafted image crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. A few weeks later, Olivia appeared on the porch of the house that was now mine. She clutched a small suitcase, her face pale, streaked with tears. I stepped outside, holding a cup of coffee, and leaned against the doorframe. "Luke, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know where to go. I'm so sorry." I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I took a slow sip of coffee and said, "I don't care about your regrets, Olivia. You made your choice. Now live with it." She opened her mouth to speak again, but I turned and shut the door in her face. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt final, like closing the chapter of a book I never wanted to reread. I stood in the quiet of my home, staring out the window as Olivia's figure grew smaller, retreating down the driveway. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The love I'd once felt for her was gone, replaced by a cold resolve to rebuild my life on my own terms. She had destroyed everything we had, but I hadn't let her win. Piece by piece, I'd taken back control and ensured that her betrayal would follow her like a shadow for the rest of her life. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sorrow. All I felt was the satisfaction of knowing justice had been served. As I sank into my chair, sipping my coffee, a thought crossed my mind. I didn't just survive the storm. I had weathered it. And now, I was finally free.